Alright, so it's finally time to dismantle this wooden machine, which I was originally calling a mock-up, but which turned out to do quite a lot of good work. And I was continually thinking that I had done the last job already, but I think now this is actually finally the last job that I needed to do with it. So this is the reverse side of this Z plate here. And originally this was going to have nothing at all done to it, but when I discovered how well the MDF machine was working, I thought I might try and take some stuff off the back of here for two reasons. The main reason is that we have a 10mm spacer in here, and that is to give enough clearance between the back of the Z plate and, you were thinking I was going to say this, right? Well, kind of. That's actually clearing there, so it's alright, but more to the point is that the top of the ball screw mounting block there is about 1mm behind it. So that was kind of the limiting factor of how close it could come back towards the gantry. Obviously we want to have this as close to the gantry as we can for rigidity and strength. So it was kind of annoying that I needed this 10mm block in here. But I thought, what if I replaced this 10mm block with a 6mm block that would let me take 4mm off this distance, for a total of just 88mm from the front of the gantry to the front of the Z plate there, which is pretty small considering we're using these large HG20 size rails on both axes here. Anyway, so I'm going to replace that with 6mm, which meant that I had to take 4mm off the back of here. This is a 10mm plate, so we're approaching halfway through that plate, which is not super ideal because we want to keep it strong still, but the thing is I'm using a spindle like that which comes in a massive chunk of aluminium itself, so that's not terrible. I think that we're going to be taking a little bit out of this one here. So what I've done is I took 4mm out of here. That's what I was just saying about the ball screw mounting block needs to go 4mm back into it. Then I took 1mm off this area here. Why only 1 instead of 4? Well, there's actually that's the nut block there for the Z-axis. There's actually a 3mm spacer in there already at the moment to make up the 3mm gap, and so if I was taking 4 off here, I only need to take that 3mm spacer out, so we're reducing number of parts, which is good, but then we do need to still take 1mm off this bit here, so that's why there's only that there. And then I was playing around with the ball nose end mill that I got. I couldn't really figure out a good way to get FreeCAD to make paths for me for this, so I just did FreeCAD for straight end mill only, like a flat, square nosed end mill. And then for the ball nose end mill, I just sat here with the machine and typed in some G code to get it to run there. And so we've got some curves there just to avoid the stress risers. Uncle Bruce doesn't like stress risers, and I don't like them either, so we got rid of some stress risers and played around with the ball nose end mill like that. And then this little bit in here, I thought I'd go just a little bit in, another 0.5mm in there, also with the ball nose, at least on the edges. I didn't do that here because that's just to give a little bit of extra clearance to there. And like I say, it is actually clearing, but it's extremely close. So I just wanted to make sure that that had a little bit more room to move. And then on the back side of this, or the front face, just where these bolts are here, we have counterbored that because this all needs to be flat for the spindle to fit onto there. Otherwise the front has nothing done to it. And these larger holes here that I've added, those are so that we can get a 5mm and a 6mm bolt all the way through, including the head of the bolt. And the smaller ones, or the closer spaced ones there, are so that we can tighten up the nut block for this axis, which is in there. Just there you can see those 4 bolts there, and that has to be done after this front part of the Y assembly is stuck on. So we need to be able to get at that from all the way from the front here, well, behind the spindle there. And then these ones here are for the ball screw mounting blocks of the Z-axis there, so they're just behind there, and that's so that we can take that ball screw all the way out without taking the front plate off if we want to for some reason later on. And here are the two Y plates together. they're all fitting together nicely this time, and not really anything else to report there. I tweaked and changed the design a tiny bit, but nothing major. And of course, as soon as I said that there were no other parts needed to make, I remembered that I do actually need to make the 6mm spacers that I was just talking about. So that's these. I'm trying some holding tabs. It worked out pretty well. Oh, you've got to keep it straight. Okay, the next job is to dismantle basically everything, because we're going to have to take all that apart and take this off, put the aluminium one on the table. But before I do that, I'm going to also turn the table upside down and do some more welding, because I want to change these castor wheels. I've never been quite satisfied with these. So these are some that I bought on Trade Me. They're really cheap, like 50 bucks for 4 of them, and they're claimed to be rated for 75 kilos each, which would give me 300 kilos total. But one thing I don't like about them too much is that they're fairly soft rubber, the tire part, and they don't turn very well when you try and make them turn around like that. They roll okay when they're going straight, but the turning, just as I'm pushing the table around, it just didn't feel like they were really quite up to the task, at least on this concrete. But maybe on a smooth floor it'd be alright. But I've got some new ones that are rated to twice as much. So these are 150 kilos, right? Yeah. So that should give us 600 kilos total. And they're harder rubber. There's a little bit of softness to them, so they're not going to be clattering around if you're moving too fast, but they're much, much harder than those softer tire ones that are on there at the moment, so I think that'll be more appropriate. And they're also 125mm diameter wheels instead of 100, so that should help roll a little bit better. And also it will give me another 2.5 centimeters of ground clearance, because another problem I've been having is that with this ground clearance here, let's see if I can show you, it's extremely close. It's not touching, but it's very, very close. And at first I thought that would be great, but turns out that's a little bit inconvenient, because especially with this floor that I have here, it's not flat there. It's got these sort of bumps where the grass likes to grow. And if I have to be careful when I'm bringing it around here that I don't get it in the wrong place, because the bottom of the table will grind into the concrete and then it kind of gets stuck. So that clearance being so tight is not really ideal. Another couple of centimeters would be nice to have. Another problem I've noticed is that with the vacuum cleaner cable, which I have coming around here, it likes to get stuck under there, and like it'll go under there by itself, of course, but when I try and get it back out, it just gets really stuck. And of course there's this issue that we discovered previously, if you were watching one of my videos earlier. We discovered that we made it a little bit too low to get the jack under to lift it up. Another thing I like about these, apart from the extra sturdiness, is that the base plate is fairly narrow, so it's a more suitable fit for these size of bars that I'm going to be welding it onto. See, these ones, they stick out quite a lot, and they're also made of a much, much thinner material than the new ones. These ones are a bit more chunky. Okay, so I've got the new wheels on there, and they're looking quite nice. The old MDF machine has been dismantled and is now having a rest on the wood pile. So these wheels are much more convenient in the extra ground clearance they allow. So now this bit here is actually easy to use. I still don't like winding it out too much, so I'll be using spacers of wood like that, probably bigger than that. But anyway, just for today, that's enough to get it to a point where the wheel's not taking any weight, which means that the table is now nice and solid there. And I also welded on this little piece of square tube here. It just goes down to there, and it's blocked off at the end, or welded a bit on the end there as well. And I'm going to use this old jack handle that I found in my pile of things that doesn't work. And that's just going to sit in there, and it can turn around like that, and it's going to be the base for my swiveling mount for the monitor and the keyboard. I haven't really thought about what's going to happen above this point too much, but this piece here is the only thing that I needed to weld today while the table was all dismantled. That's better. I was just checking the fit of the rails onto the Z-plate here. This is the one that I flattened nicely on the stone, and the flatness is great. They fit great in that regard. But I realized I made a rather large screw up. These M5 bolts are what you're supposed to use to hold it on, so they'll go in there, and then the head of these will fit into that hole so that it's like below the level of there. And then over here there'll be an M5 tapped hole that, oh no, somebody drilled that to M5 instead of tapped it to M5. So we can't just put the screw into there on that side. So I thought maybe I could just tap that to M6 now from M5, because I noticed that at the bottom there, that hole, the bottom part of that hole, is actually M6. So you can put an M6 bolt in there, but you cannot fit the head of the M6 bolt in there. The M6 bolt's head is 10 millimeters diameter, that's 9.5. So I thought maybe I could counterbore that out or drill it out or something a little bit, but I didn't really want to do anything to this, and it's probably quite hard steel as well. So what I decided to do was just make the head of the M6 bolts smaller, like that, just on the belt sander. At least with this one it was easy, but the shorter ones that I want to do it with, I have to make a little holder thingy to do it like that. But after doing that, it didn't take too long either. We've ended up with this situation here. So these are now M6 bolts. They're in there quite nicely and have a little bit of wiggle room. So I think that'll be enough, because fortunately the holes match up absolutely perfectly on these. So it's a good thing that we don't need much wiggle room to adjust, because we are not going to get it. Actually, when I tapped the holes here, just the ones at each end, and put the bolts all the way in and then back them off just a little bit, we actually have a decent amount of room to play with for adjusting. So I made a bunch of these bolts with the narrow heads. Fortunately, I only needed 10 of them, otherwise I wouldn't have been so excited about doing it this way. And the first 5 on this rail fit in quite nicely, no problems. But unfortunately, it seems like the holes in my plate here were not as absolutely perfect as I thought, because I can only get a couple of these in on this side before I run into issues where I can't tighten the bolts anymore because they're just not quite in the right place. So I think, unfortunately, I will have to file out the bottom part of that hole there, which is a real nuisance because that material is quite hard. I'm just going to do it with this, but yeah, it's really quite hard steel, that. So this is getting more annoying by the minute. Like, I really hate it when I make a mistake that costs me so much time like this. Just checking the fit of these pieces. Looks like I made a screw up here as well, because when I put these bolts in, and then we look down there, whoops, that hole doesn't line up at all. There we go, I just had to file them elongated like that. Fortunately, this is facing towards the back where it's not going to be very visible. I heard that the judges will penalise you for having this kind of thing facing towards the front, but this is okay. I'm just doing some test fitting of all the parts that are going to go onto the gantry, and for the most part it's going quite well. I put a couple more bolts in, like this one, to go in from there into here, which there was no connection going directly into here that way before, because this plate is only held on by bolts that go through it into there. So there's just a little bit more connection there, and also I put one from underneath to go directly from this plate to that plate, because there was actually no direct connection between these, at least no bolt connecting them before. It was all sort of going from this one through to there like that. Anyway, so that should be a little bit more solid. And yeah, everything on here is fitting pretty good. These fit in perfectly, and this fit in perfectly. So I've got my 6mm recess there, and it's like smack dab in the middle pretty much, I think. So these are the 6mm deep pockets that I machined out there. That's working quite well. Everything on these two Y plates here is fitting nicely. Yeah, this is fitting perfectly. There's just one sort of annoying issue that I had, and that's that this channel that I milled underneath the ball screw to fit the back of the ball nut was not quite wide enough. If I had have made it just another millimetre or two wider, it's a bit dark, isn't it? Yeah, if it had have been just a little bit wider, it would have been great. But as it is, I had to use the belt sander to round off the edges of the ball nut at the back, and also like the nut block. This is the aluminium nut block that we're looking at. but the ball nut itself had to be rounded as well. And so unfortunately in there at the moment is a whole bunch of steel dust all over the ball screw. So what I'd like to do next is put my cordless drill on here and spin it around to get this to slide up and down. But I can't do that yet because I'm going to have to wash all the steel dust off and be very careful about it. And I'm probably going to have to take that entire ball nut apart and thoroughly clean it now, which is kind of a bummer. So more things that I didn't really expect to have to be doing. So I washed this with soapy water. I don't think like any other sort of cleaners or solvents would have worked too well to get that dust off. And then just gently wound it to the end, and I'm just going to let all the balls fall out here. Not too worried about this anymore. It's just kind of a nuisance to have to put them in again, but it's not impossible. And like I did it with that smaller one, and as I mentioned when I was doing that, it's really only the size of that smaller one that made it so difficult. So this one should actually be a fair bit easier. And I do want to give it a thorough cleaning after what I just did to it. Okay, I'm doing some work on the X rails now. I took the actual rails themselves off the extrusions that they're mounted on, and I rebolted them with Loctite as per suggestion from somebody in the comments a while ago. And now I'm just sort of fitting everything on there with the gantry just to make sure that it's going to fit. In particular, I'm checking that these side plates don't scrape too much on here, because in my CAD plan there's only a 1mm clearance in here, so it's a little bit tight. I could of course, you know, sand it down a bit, but obviously don't want to do that for that huge length on both sides. But fortunately everything's sitting there quite nicely. So it's not bolted down or anything yet. I've made these holes larger for the M8 bolts that I'm going to be using. Yeah, so now I have it just sort of lightly tapped into place with the hammer. Very, very light touches with the hammer to get all these rails sitting there. And with another light touch we can scroll all the way down there. So this is, I'm not sure how much that weighs, but it's getting pretty heavy already. But it seems to be rolling quite nice, and there's no catching on here. It's less than a millimeter clearance in some places, but all you need is more than 0, I think, so we should be good. The profiles of these extrusions is a little bit awkward for what I'm trying to do here, because the holes under these rails need to go like that, and you can see the edge of the lip there, so the hole or the bolt needs to go like that. So on the underside of these I had to use this Dremel side cutting thingy, so I can use my transfer punch to finally get the hole in the right place, because it's going to be able to go, well, this won't be here, so it's going to be able to go right about there, and I can punch the spot exactly where I need it, and then when I drill through it, this bit on the upper side will be gone as well. Okay, got all those holes drilled now, and it's bolted down nice and securely and in just the right place. Man, it was a mission getting those holes drilled though. There's something about the way this is shaped that it made the drill bit get jammed up very, very easily. And I think it's because it's sort of going like that, where that Allen key sitting is about where the drill was going. And I know for a fact that part of the reason is, as it came out the bottom here, it was getting pressed on one side only by this tab here, as you can see there. But also going through this bit here in the middle, it just got jammed up so much as well. I couldn't really figure out what that was about, but it's probably something to do with it being a little bit lopsided, and also, at least on this side here, it was drilling out the wall of the channel, the extrusion as well. But anyway, man, so I eventually figured out that the best way to deal with it was to get some strong clamps and clamp down both sides of the piece that I was drilling on the bench of the drill press, and yeah, that was about the only way to do it. Anyway, that took longer than I thought. So the next step was to put the gantry back on and just check that everything can still slide as smoothly as it was before, now that everything's bolted down, because it wasn't bolted down before. But now we have another problem. I checked that these bolts were going to clear these sliders here, so everything's okay there. Very close though, as you can tell, like that. But now we have a... Well, What's wrong with this now? Oh, I see, we've got tabs on the bottom there. So now we have a new issue to deal with. Man, the last few days I've been working on this project, it seems like the more I work on it, the further away it gets from completion. There's just one thing after another shows up that, like, I thought I was going to be at this point by 3 days ago, probably, is what I was expecting. But anyway, what are we going to do about this? I guess we can just chop the top of the bolts off there, so that's going to be another hour gone, I suppose. So I tried trimming the top of one of these bolts off with the belt sander, but that was way too slow, so now I had to go with this little cutting disc thing on the Dremel. I got about halfway through this one, and I'm also halfway through the cutting disc. And I don't think I have enough of them to get through all the 24 bolts I need to. So it might be time to break out the hacksaw. I was just thinking the other day that it would be pretty amazing if I managed to get through this whole project without having to use a hacksaw. So yeah, it seemed too good to be true. And it was. Well, I'm on my last one of these now out of 24, so there's quite a lot to do. And at first it was really tedious. I mean, hacksawing's not really that much fun at the best of times. But I noticed after a while something that kind of made it a little bit more enjoyable. I noticed that the hacksaw was almost talking to me. Like, every 4 strokes it was going like, let's go. Can you hear it? Let's go. And then the 3rd and 4th stroke it was like, let's go, hacksaw, let's go, hacksaw. Can you hear it? So whenever I heard that, it kind of cheered me up a bit. I find the whole thing quite amusing, actually. Let's go, hacksaw. Okay, so a few hours later, that's done. So it's all bolted down now with these nice customized short head bolts, and we can roll. Everything's moving nice and smoothly, except the difference from this morning is that it's bolted down. Otherwise, basically the same. So yeah, seems to be taking a long time to get everything done, but I guess at the end of the day all that matters is that it's done properly. Speaking of the end of the day, it is pretty much now the end of the day, so tomorrow I guess I'll get started on what I thought I was going to be doing yesterday. Okay, it's next morning now, and I've already spent about half an hour doing something that I didn't think I was going to have to do. Seems to be a common theme here. This pulley wheel here is inexplicably jammed very, very tightly onto the end of the shaft. I've taken this off and off at least a dozen times, no problem. It just goes whoop, whoop, whoop. Super easy. Now, you can see I've made progress there. Initially these two were basically touching, but I put some WD-40 in there, yes, removed the grub screws of course, and I had the only way I can get it to move anywhere at all is to jam a screwdriver in here and like wedge it apart a little bit, and that's the progress I've made in about 20 minutes. It's like 3.5 millimeters. What's really weird is it's not even on there much, like if you, I don't know if you'll be able to see down there, but the shaft is only grabbing on at the end by a little bit. So that's probably part of the problem, because it was maybe able to twist a little bit on the end and it got jammed. But either way, I'm obviously wedging with my screwdriver one side, turning it around and then wedging the other way. So I'm spreading the wedging. But man, I think I've had another fucking 10 minutes to go or so here. Okay, it's been about another 20 minutes now. I've made it. I can get the whole screwdriver shaft in there now, which is progress. And this should have been literally a 1 second job. You just grab it and slide it off. Probably less than 1 second actually. Man, I woke up this morning feeling good about this project, decided to forget about all those annoyances from yesterday, and then right off the bat we get this. And no, I don't have a gear puller. Stop typing that comment. We're getting there though, like it is moving slowly. Unfortunately I've already loosened this this ring here. It's kind of jiggling around, so I hope it doesn't fall off completely. Okay, 15 minutes later I'm still here. Man, I can hardly even believe this is happening. It looks like, when I look down in here, it looks like there's about 1 or 2 millimeters of the shaft remaining stuck into the pulley. and I can wiggle it, and I can clearly see in here that it's wiggling. Oh, you can even see that on camera, right? You can see that it looks quite loose there, right? But it just will not come off. No way, no how. Fortunately, we now have a gap in here that's more than 6 millimeters wide. So I can use some of that 6 millimeter aluminium plate to make like a fork thingy like that, and then maybe tap the shaft from the inside like that, like a sort of a poor man's gear puller situation. So I think I'm going to do that because it'll be a nice change from trying to do this. Okay, so I made this little slot in here. This hole was already there, actually kind of convenient. And I'm just going to put that over here, clamp this onto the side of the bench. Oh, come on. Oh. About
oh my
time.
goodness.
Okay, I think I see what was going on there. Right at the tip of the shaft there you can see a scratch. It starts here and it goes around like that, and there's a slight angle to it. And I think what this is I had a bit of an incident one time. The end mill got jammed up, and then I cancelled the job and I let the Z-axis, that's the Z-axis here that we're looking at, I let this pull the end mill out of the workpiece while it was still stuck, and it made a huge graunching sound initially because it was getting, like the end mill was like welded into the workpiece kind of, but then it came free. So I think what happened here is that the set screw, grub screw in there, because you don't get much room to work with on the end of the shaft. It's only like 10 millimeters or maybe 11 millimeters sticking out there, and I'm using these pulley wheels that are admittedly probably a little bit too large for this, and the grub screw is right about there, and the grub screw would have been grinding into there for about half a turn by the looks of it. So that's what's given it a bump on the end, and that's why it was resisting me pulling it off all the way to the very end, like literally to the last half a millimeter or so. It was resisting the slide. Right, so I filed that scratch off there, and now it goes on and off quite nicely. See, it should have just been a 1 second job like that. But anyway, it's restored to normal now. Not sure if the same can be said for my sanity though. Alright, so that pulley is off now. And why did we even want to do that in the first place? Well, I wanted to replace these deep groove ball bearings that they give you to start with some proper angular contact bearings. And I say proper, although I'm not sure quite how proper these are, because I first looked around on websites in New Zealand to see if I could get them quicker, and I found a couple of places they wanted like $100 or something for one of these. So I closed that browser tab immediately, almost by reflex action, and looked for something on AliExpress where I found these for $5. So that price difference makes me wonder, but they look alright, I suppose. I mean, they're definitely not deep groove bearings, they're definitely angular contact. So yeah, going to put these in here, and just sort of wondering whether I should go with back-to-back or face-to-face. I'm thinking probably really doesn't matter that much. So I'll just show you how these things go together, just in case anybody's interested who hasn't seen it. There's a nice big block here, and on the back side we have a rubber wiper kind of a thing that seems to be permanently stuck in there, and a little steel ring which will go over here, and that will butt up against the end of the ball screw, or where the actual screw starts, and that will stick into the wiper on the back like that. It's just a sort of a loose fit in that rubber, and then the bearings will go in there, and the bearings are contacted in there on the outer rim of the bearing, the outer race edge, and then this will go in there, and it has another rim here that will contact on the outer edge again, and that will clamp the outer edges from each side when you bolt that down. Then we have another one of these steel ring things, a little bit longer this time, and that also goes into another rubber wiper on this side, just sort of loosely fits in there. And then this thing has a nice little flat machined edge on there, and it's threaded on the inside, and so this is going to get bolted onto about there, but it's only going to touch the inside rim or through this ring here, it's going to be pressing on the inside rim of the bearings inside the housing. So the bearings will be clamped on the outer rim from the block itself and on the inner rims from the bit that goes through the shaft. So if my understanding is correct, what you get is that the inner two bearing or inner edges are clamped against each other like that, and then you've got the outer edges clamped against each other like that. And from what I've been reading on the net, that should preload these angular contact bearings. If I've got them face to face or back to back, one way or the other, it shouldn't matter. So what I thought I was going to get here if I tried this just by squeezing those two in the middle and the two on the outside is that there would be no play, but there's easily a 0.5 millimeter of play, possibly even a little bit more, axially, of course, like up and down like that. So I'm not sure if it's supposed to be like that, so I'm hoping that what's happening here is that it's just the side effect of me not really being able to put enough pressure on it with my hands, and that when I assemble it all like I just explained, hopefully that play will go away. And for the lubrication for these bearings, I'm just going to use some of this. It's a spray-on one. It seems to be a little bit thinner, and I've heard people say that it doesn't last as long as the one that you can get from like a tube that's thicker. But that's all I have at the moment, and I just want to kind of make some progress and get something done, so I'm just going to use that. I have some of the tube lube, like the thicker one, coming in the mail, so I might be able to use that on other things as we go forward. So these original bearings that were in there, to remove those, I just put the block on a couple of other blocks like that, and I had this large bolt, and just a little bit of light tapping in there was able to get those out. So I thought for the new bearings, a little bit of light tapping might be enough to get them in. Unfortunately, that didn't seem to be happening. So I thought, well, I'll put them in the freezer and make them hopefully shrink a little bit. Meanwhile, I had to get the one that was halfway in. I had to get that out, so I thought, oh, I'll do a little bit of light tapping on that to get that out again. But unfortunately, with these angular contact bearings, at least the orientation that one was in there, I barely breathed on it with the hammer, and it all fell apart. And I've just spent the last 10 minutes trying to find the balls on the floor. I found them all now, but it certainly wasn't made easier by the fact that we have aluminium chips all over the place here. That was very distracting. Every time I thought I found one, it was just a circular shaped aluminium chip. Anyway, we're back together here. Well, we're not back together, but we've just spent another 20 minutes wasting time. I seem to be expert at finding ways to waste my time. Okay, now I've got to put this back together, but given the way that it fell apart so easily, I'm thinking it's probably quite easy to reassemble as well. But I was just looking at this bit here. It seems to be made of fiberglass, I think, but it's also kind of shitty. Like, maybe this is why these ones were so much cheaper than the other ones. Like this, well, this is only part of it probably, but it's just not really that well made. But all it has to do is hold those balls apart from each other, so it'll probably be good enough. Just a little tip for anyone else who finds themselves in this situation: don't try and start doing this by putting this up that way and putting the retainer thing in there and then trying to put the central piece in from the top. It's not going to work. Do it this way, because you'll find that those balls actually kind of sit in there as if the middle piece was magnetic almost. See that? It just sits in there quite nicely for me. Now, I haven't finished this yet, but I'm hoping that it's going to be a lot easier to put this with the sloping sides there down from the top. Yeah, so don't do it the other way, because you'll probably end up in a mental asylum somewhere. Okay, it's all back together now. It's much easier to do it, like I said, putting the outer ring on from the top. And then I just put this on there and gave just a firm press like that, and it clicked into place. These things are barely held together. I didn't realize how fragile they were. So I tried freezing these in the freezer for an hour or so, and sure enough, when they're a little bit smaller, I confirmed that I probably could get them down in there, because placing them in there in just a light sort of a tap 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 with the back of a screwdriver, and they were slowly going in. But I didn't want to put them in all the way, because once they're in permanently, I think. There's just no way I'd be able to get them out. And I was watching video on YouTube and just looking around the internet a little bit, and I think my problem that I was saying before, there was some play even when I was holding them together like that, that's probably caused by the fact that they're supposed to have a little bit of a shim between them, and if I understand correctly, it could either be shimmed on the outer edge or the inner. Probably inner would be easier, and that's so that the preload takes effect and you get that proper taking up of all the slack so that they're not going to move axially. But that kind of a shim's not really something that I'm going to be able to make from the usual aluminium can trick very easily. So I'll probably have to buy that, and if I wanted to do that, I'm not going to be able to do it today, that's for sure. So I'm getting very tempted to just put these crappy skateboard bearings back in. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, I'm only going to be making toy planes with this, right? That's what this is all for. So I don't really need to have I don't need to be chasing micrometers as Marco Reps does. So this is probably just going to be good enough. And definitely for today, I'll just put them back in there because they're a lot easier to work with too. You can tap on the central section there quite hard and they don't fall apart. And as far as I can tell, they don't need any lubrication either, which is nice. So it's looking like I might just put those back in and forget, at least for the time being, I just want to forget that I ever saw these. At this point, I think flushing them down the toilet would be more satisfying. Actually, no, it wouldn't, because they'd get stuck in there and wouldn't go down, wouldn't they? That would piss me off as well. Okay, so I put all that back together with the cheapo bearings in there. They were performing reasonably well so far, actually, so I think I'm just going to go with the policy of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And maybe sometime in future, if I do find it to be insufficient, like if I want to machine adamantium or something like that, then maybe by that time I'll have figured out what shims I need to use these fancier angular bearings, so I'll just keep them around. But for the time being, we'll just go like that. And I've just realized it's 2 PM already and I haven't got jack shit done all day. This is exactly where I started this morning. So I think I'll just forget about these bearings and stuff for a while. Maybe move on to something. Oh, I've got 24 holes to tap over there. Maybe that'll cheer me up. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do is clean down these carriages properly, because I've just been using them the way they came from the factory. And apparently that's not proper lubricant in there. It's just some sort of a anti-rusting preservation thingy. So I wasn't expecting to be using these for so long. Like I literally just fit them together just to check the fit on the MDF mock-up, and ended up using them quite a lot. So probably shouldn't have been doing that. So hopefully they haven't been too damaged. Oh, that one doesn't want to move at all. So all of them are quite nice and free moving. These balls are actually more captive than I thought in here. Like, you don't have to worry too much about them falling out. I was paranoid that when I took these things out, the balls would just fall everywhere, but no. So I guess those plastic things are more to be a guide for lining up the rails when you put them on, maybe. Oh, this one doesn't want to move either. What the hell? Oh, okay. Yeah, there's a couple that are a bit stuck here, eh? There were some tiny little chips of aluminium that you probably can't see in there, so good that we got those out, I suppose. And when I start cutting, like when I set this up for real and start cutting stuff, I want to put at least a little bit of covering over these so that they don't get filled up with MDF dust and aluminium chips again. Yeah, so I found you can actually be quite firm and forceful with these. Just, well, I'm not scraping too hard here obviously with the steel screwdriver, but you can slide them around like that, just check everything's moving, and each one of them has 4 races and they're all going very nice and smooth, except for this one over here, which is super stuck and sticky. So I reckon it's got something jammed down in the back on the reverse side of the race. Possibly a little piece of aluminium, or more than one piece of aluminium chips, I mean, and could be maybe even a piece of plastic from the edge here when it was made. A little bit of that got stuck down in the back somewhere. So not really sure what I'm going to do about this. I'll play around with it a bit more. I don't really want to take it apart. I've had enough of picking up ball bearings off the ground for today. I managed to get that freed up alright, although I didn't see anything come out, which is a little worrying, so there might be still a bit of something in there. And when I get lots of liquid on here, so that it's more like the liquid goes all the way into the back and saturates it, every now and then it gets a little bit sticky again. So I think there's something floating around in the back there still. but it's way better than it was, so I think we'll just have to go with this. I'm just cleaning this thing out as well from the y-axis. Unfortunately, the IPA seems to be not working very well on the grease or whatever's in there, so I'm going to have to use something else. And I also noticed that when I filed this off to take the corners off it so that it would fit in that groove at the bottom of on the front of the gantry, I did it on the wrong side, of course. So Murphy's Law says that, you know, if there's a 50-50 chance you're going to get it wrong, you will. And the wrong is that there's a greasing nipple thingy here that has to be facing forwards away from the gantry so I can actually access it, but that's where I did my filing. Fortunately it didn't ruin it, but what it means is I'm going to have to do my filing. I'm going to file these corners off now. Okay, I sanded off the other corners of this that I needed to, and then I found that Terps was what was needed to dissolve the old grease inside, so it's nice and clean and spotless in there, so there should be no traces of that steel dust that could have gotten in there. Okay, the next job I'm doing is to cut this piece of MDF. Well, there's 3 pieces of MDF on there at the moment. Well, there's 9 now, but there were originally just one contiguous block of MDF here in 3 layers, and had to make way for these channels or these extrusions to go here for the straightening, so that was another unexpected job. Now the 4th one I did not cut in the same way, but I put a couple of holes there. So the idea with that is that this is going to be on the bottommost layer, and in my calculations somehow in my mathematically challenged brain decided that 3 layers of 18 was going to be 64. It's 54, not 64, but I thought it was going to be coming just above the extrusion here, so that this would be sitting a little bit on top of the extrusion with a small gap. And the idea with these holes here is that you would be able to put a jack that's about the size of a 4x2 in any direction you want to place it, and then you'd be able to press up on here to lift it up a little bit off that one, and that would give you just enough room to put some sort of a bar, or more likely you'd have to make something not unlike that, sort of a forklift prong thingy, that you would be able to place underneath. And now that these are here, we can lift up on those, and we're not going to be damaging this ball screw here because we've got quite a bit of clearance. So that's one nice side effect of having these, because I was sort of wondering how I was going to make it so that I could lift it up off the bench if I wanted to. How you would lift it, I'm still not quite sure. Probably an engine hoist would do it, or if you have something in the ceiling like that, which I think that is for butchering beef carcasses maybe. So I'm pretty sure it would be able to lift this up just for a while at least. But you could lift it with a block and tackle if you wanted to maybe change these if like the MDF got wet or something like that, or if you wanted to change the bench completely and put it on a different bench, like if I wanted to make this afresh with steel that wasn't so rotten on the inside, because this is all rusted all down the middle there. That's probably rusted inside there, so would be nice to have another bench at some point. But anyway, yeah, so my calculations didn't go quite to plan there, so I'm going to have to find a little bit more MDF to place just to clear that bit there. Alright, so there we go. I found another layer, just a 12mm layer, to get above the level there, and those 2 are going to have to both have a hole in them. So the idea is that you'll put a 4x2 or something in there, because the jack will be on the floor, right? So you'd want to reach up a bit higher with something like this, and then push up with that. Everything's upside down here, by the way. We're looking at the bottom of the table. So you'd be pushing up with that, and then you'd be able to get your forklift prongs or whatever to lift up under these 2 bits there, hopefully. And I haven't really thought about how the lifting cradle or whatever it would be arranged, but this is all I have to think about at this point. And it's quite likely that this will never ever be lifted up off the bench. But it would be nice to have the ability to at some point, just in case that becomes necessary. Okay, that's the slab on its final resting place, or I might have to take it off 1 or 2 more times after this, I suppose, but that's where it's going to sit anyway. And I'm a little disappointed at how slippery it is. Like, even just a light movement can move it around a bit like that. So yeah, probably going to have to stick it down somehow to that MDF underneath. So this is what I was saying about lifting it off the table. You could put a jack there with a piece of wood there, preferably a little bit sturdier one than that, and then you could push on the second, well, you'd be pushing on the third from the bottom one there. Let me just do that a little bit and show you what happens. Okay, that wasn't quite what I was thinking. For some reason I thought all three sections here were going to lift up together, but I don't know. It's funny that I had to see that happen before realizing that it wasn't going to work. This is what you get when you're planning things on the fly instead of a coherent approach like from the beginning. Anyway, it's good enough though, because there's no weight on this bit here now, so I can easily shift that out of the way and then slide my forklift prongs or whatever under here, and then do the same at the front. So I guess these prongs would have to go in one by one, wouldn't they? But anyway, yeah, do the same at the front after that, and then you'd be able to lift it up. Okay, I'm just setting up the Z-axis rails for what will hopefully be the last time with the thread locker, and just using my high-spec Mitsutoyo dial here. Hey, wait a minute. Mitsutoyo Banggood. How could you? No, this is just some kind of rip-off of a Mitsutoyo dial. You didn't think you'd see one of those fancy, expensive things on my channel, did you? Anyway, we're starting at 40 there, and it kind of goes wavy in the middle down to about 33-ish, and then back up to around 40 at the end again. So I don't know what's up with that. Like, each end seems to be in the same place, and then there's a fluctuation in the middle. I know this. So that's 0.7 or yeah 0.07 millimeters. Some at this point here. So that's not very impressive. I'm sure you've seen better in other videos on YouTube with people setting up much more high-spec systems with proper Mitsutoyo dials. But I think that's just going to have to do it for my system, at least for this axis. Alright, and just putting it all together here to see how things fit together. Yet another fitting check, and it's all going to have to come apart and back together a couple more times probably. But starting to look quite nice there in all shiny aluminium. The X-rails went on there quite nicely, no problems there. They're tightly bolted down now, but it's all sliding smoothly, at least it was until I put these nuts on here to hold it in place. And I didn't need any shim in here. I might put one in later, but I think I could get away without it. So that lined up just beautifully. And this here, my 1mm clearance is more like a 0.5 millimeter. But I think that'll be fine. It just slides smoothly down. It's not scraping or anything. This bit here was a little bit of a nuisance because the laser cut hole was 6mm when it needs. Well, it would have been nice to tap this to 6mm, but we ended up with a 6mm through hole. So I'm just going to have to put a nut on the back here like this. Unfortunately, I can't make this hole any larger like I did with these ones that I tapped to M8. Because it needs to be M6 to get through this ball screw mounting block like that. And on the other side of that, the other one kind of collides with the extrusion there, so I had to make some space for that to go on there, but that's alright. It's a little bit inconvenient maybe because to take this ball screw off now, I have to take this rail off to get at that bolt, which means I have to take that off, which means I have to take basically everything off in order to change these ball screws, but hopefully we're not going to be doing that much. Another couple of issues I came across were mainly due to my changing of this spacing here. So I completely took out the spaces that were in here and I reduced these ones which were 10mm to 6mm. So I've reduced this whole thing by 10mm closer to, so the front of this here is now only 88mm away from the front of the gantry, which I think is pretty good. Because these rails and carriages combination, that's 30mm there that you can't avoid. So I've got 30 and 30, so it's 60mm, and then I've only added 28mm to get from here to the front of that one. Well, that's 10mm there. So if you forget about how thick that plate is, it's only from here to here is 78mm. And we started with an unavoidable 60. So yeah, quite pleased with quite pleased with my design there. It's a little bit tricky to assemble in some respects, but once it's assembled, it's nice and sturdy. And anyway, I think it's great. But anyway, because this is now 10 millimeters closer than it was before, as I mentioned in one of my previous videos, I need a smaller, shorter belt to go around here, so I ordered that. But somehow I made a mistake and I didn't get one that's quite short enough, so I'm going to have to get one that's even shorter, and unfortunately that's going to be another couple of weeks before I can get everything running. Another issue is that this piece here that was cut out there was specifically made for the Z plate to come along here and get just a couple more centimeters into here, because the limiting factor is actually this rail. It's not the block so much, so we can come all the way into here before touching that is our limiting. But anyway, it needs to be 10 millimeters back now, so I'm just probably going to have to use the jigsaw to cut a bit out of there. Shouldn't be too hard. Another slight issue was that these bolts needed to be customized again, so I had to use the belt sander to get another 2 millimeters off those. Let's see which way we're going. Oops. So we can go. We could go almost another 2 centimeters, and we have room here for these to go another 3 centimeters or so. I put a limit switch inductive sensor in here that's just got enough clearance like that, and also just enough space to put that in there. And these will now clear the back of there now that they've been sanded down. At least they would if we could go any further after fixing this. And probably one of the most important things to check is this. Check this out. Whoop. That's quite nice to see, isn't it?